All right. All right. We are live. We are live. We are live. How you doing, Facebook? It's your boy Reverend Malik Thomas. I'm glad to be here on behalf of the Freedom Summer Academy. We're gonna give people a chance to log on. Um, we got a show today. It's been an awesome day. It's been a major day, major news day, and we're gonna get into that. A very, very important topic today. So just give people a chance to log on, like, subscribe, share. I'm going to share it on mine. I'm glad to be here on behalf of the Freedom Summer Academy. We're going to get somebody just turned on their Facebook Live. All right. Let me tune in. Let me make sure people know. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm just excited. Today's conversation is so important. It's something that has been a passion of mine ever since I was 13. I'll never forget. My mother, the Reverend Dr. Dubai Thomas, had just graduated with her PhD from Howard. I had seen her at this point preaching all over the country, all over really the world, and God used her in some major ways. But she went to go preach at one of the smaller churches in the city of Baltimore. Nothing wrong with smaller churches, but she went to go preach there. And because she was a woman, my mother earned Masters of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School, undergrad from Morgan, PhD from Howard, over 25, 30 years of experience, not just in ministry, but also in higher education. They made my mother preach from the floor. I will never forget that. That was a moment that I had already started to discern my call to ministry. And I told myself that if I ever go into ministry, I would do everything I could as a man to fight against whatever kept my mother on the floor. In fact, what my actual words to myself was, if my mother can't stand in that pulpit, then neither can I. That's just, I'm not a mama's boy, but that's just how I feel. That if our mothers can't stand in that pulpit, then neither can I. Now, we flash forward 20 years, and yeah, there's more women in certain pulpits, but just because you have a woman in a pulpit, that does not mean that the hatred and the theological violence and the intellectual violence and the organizational violence that's inflicted on our sisters is gone. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk. The topic is Say Her Name, misogynoir, allyship, and the Black church. We are going to get into it. And so this is what I want to do. I want us to all go around. I promise we're going to get out of here by 8. So if you have any questions, I want you to respond. If you're watching on Facebook, put your question in the Facebook comment box. And there's going to be a time towards the end of our conversation here where I'm going to ask some questions. But what I want for each of our panelists to do, I want you to say your name, and I want you to speak the name of some Black women that are ancestors upon whose shoulders you stand. We're going to call their names, because I believe that scripture is true where it says, behold, there stands a great cloud of witnesses. And oftentimes we call the men who are the ancestors, but we don't speak the names of the women who bore the children, that there would be no descendants. There would be no world that we have today without our Black women. So I call the name of Hester Chambers, of Phyllis Chambers Gibbs. I call the name of Frances Clementine Blackwell Cooper. I call the name of Marsha Thomas. I call the name of Ella Baker. I call the name of Monica Elise Thomas. So these are ancestors whose names I call. So let's go first to Reverend Stephanie.
Hey, yes. Hello, I'm Stephanie Atkins, and I am excited to be here with my sisters and my brother. I thank you for taking this opportunity to go forth, and I'm still standing on the shoulders of ancestors, some of them who are just becoming ancestors. So I stand on the shoulders of my mother, Joanne Gross, who just passed, my grandmother, Doris Lockhart. I stand on the shoulders of my great grandmother, Lucille Gross. Those who lit candles and taught me how to pray. I stand on the shoulders, even still, of Katie Cannon. I stand on the shoulders of Helen Johnson, the ones who held my hand and helped me cross the street on East Capitol Street to take me to the church when I was 5. I stand on the shoulders of Esther Watson, the one who led me to Christ in the Catholic Church, who was my choir director. I stand on the shoulders of so many ancestors. And today I stand on the shoulders of Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou, who gave me a new understanding of spirituality through the spoken and written word. And so thank you so much. I hope to one day be one of the ancestors that sisters and daughters will say they stand on my shoulders as well.
Reverend Tiffany.
My name is Reverend Tiffany, and I stand on the shoulders of my mother, Queen Renewette Humphrey. I stand on the shoulders of Phyllis Wheatley. I stand on the shoulders of Winnie Mandela. I stand on the shoulders of Katie Geneva Cannon. There's so many, many, many more women to name, but I'll yield to Reverend Dwight.
So good evening, everyone. He wants us to start off calling the roll.
Let's welcome him in the space.
So look, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. So, I had to start with my grandparents. I stand on the shoulders of Mabel Sims, who had 7 children. She didn't have more high school education, but she was an entrepreneur in her own right, so much so that she was able to buy up the block and not just provide a space for her and her family. I stand on the shoulders of Alula Mae Hicks Dwight, who was my paternal grandmother when they didn't make a room for her at the table in the civil rights movement. It was her kitchen table that brought Martin Luther King to her table to assist in the strategy and the planning of moving a whole Black nation forward. I stand on the shoulders of my aunt, Alice Dwight, who was one of the women who went to seminary but was operating in a denomination that did not believe that women would be preachers. And yet she was educated and she was equipped and she was called to do the work. And so, and lastly, but definitely not least, I stand on the shoulders of Sandra Bland, my soror, who was not ashamed to speak truth and power. So we're going to call the roll today, Reverend Mellick. I just want to start with those of you who have been mighty pillars along my journey thus far.
Right.
And we say Ashe.
Ashe.
And we even invite those on Facebook just to type the names of ancestors, our Black women ancestors, even in the comments, because a lot of times Black women who have done the work we don't call their names. We don't give them the blue ribbons. When churches are founded, we talk about their first pastor, but not the women who organize the church. So I want you to use the names of Black women who became ancestors too quickly, more soon than they needed to, simply because of the topic that we're talking about, which is misogynoir in the Black church. And so we speak their names. We say Ashe.
Ashe.
We say Ashe.
Ashe.
We say Ashe. Oh.
Ashe.
We're going there today. Beyonce got it right. We call the names of our ancestors. Yes. So I want to get right into this conversation. Just real quick, there's no way we can really talk about this topic and not go into the huge news of today that the vice presidential, which really almost felt like the first season of Survivor, in terms of who was selected. And today, I got to straighten up my jersey for this. I got to straighten this up. Today, Joe Biden selected as his vice presidential candidate Senator Kamala Harris from California, who also happens to be a graduate of Howard University. Washington, D.C. 20001, the capstone of higher education, where we prepare leaders for America and the global community. Reared against the hilltop high. We
sound like Mr. Howard.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
And so, but we can't say that we're grateful for all of this. Of course, any politician that seeks the stamp of approval of the empire deserves honest critique. And so, yes, we acknowledge her past as the prosecutor in the state of California,
Mhm.
prosecutor, just district attorney in Oakland. But in the midst of this historic moment, that this Black woman who did not go to anybody's Ivy League school, did not was not the child of somebody's trust fund, is
Right.
now potentially not just the vice presidential candidate, but
Right.
is now, if she does get sworn in as vice president, becomes the immediate front runner for the
Mhm.
president of the United States in 2024. And so what I really want us to talk about is, how do we, as we stick to this topic, how do we weed through the honest critique of her policies and her track record with the misogyny and the hatred and the vilification that Black women in leadership face? How do we weave through that? So I'm gonna just start with Reverend Atkins. How do we weave through that difference?
That was a real sticky thing for me, to be perfectly honest. I'm a native Washingtonian. I'm a Bison alum, but I live in Baltimore, Maryland. And so, how can we talk about weeding and weaving through um, all of the things that Black women in leadership and power have done and tainted, without talking about some of my sisters here in Baltimore?
Mm.
And what we have to really remember is that it's okay when a man has that on his track record. We still push, we still push, we still push, we still elevate. But when it's a sister, when it's a woman, um, we prosecute her, we persecute her, we prosecute her, we persecute her. We don't pray for her, we pray on her.
Mm.
Instead of remembering that we have a whole host of male politicians who have done some things that some of us will never be able to sleep or get through, and they get a pass. They get a pass. And so I don't think that we need to spend. And yes, you're absolutely right. Every politician, every person who's going to run, is subject to that public scrutiny, and we do a microscopic look at everything that they've done. But I just say to that, let he who is without sin, cast the first stone. And then I just leave it right there. I just leave it right there.
Yeah.
Brooks, Dwight.
Yeah, so so funny. So you said a lot of, you've captured a lot of my thoughts right there. The only thing that I would have to add to that is, one, not forgetting that before Kamala Harris was was announced today, that it was a full out attack on Black women, period.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
and so it was a full on attack against the unnamed Black woman. And yet, what we found is that, even as we kind of go back through the history books, right, we celebrated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That did not happen without a Black woman. We talk about, the suffrage movement, the suffragist movement, and that did not happen without Black women. We talk about, you can dissect any section of the civil rights movement. That did not happen without Black women. And so if we're going to go to the track record, let's go to the whole track record. Let's pull the whole record. And so I would say the same about Kamala Harris, that there are some policies that were problematic, but I think that there were also some policies and some efforts that she pushed that were in the best interest of our community. So can we talk about it? Can we talk about like how, just against the backdrop of a Black Lives Matter, that she's at the forefront of pushing legislation that kind of help deal with this whole police brutality issue? Can we talk about the fact that, when we talk about people of color, and we're not just talking about Black folk, but we're talking about our Hispanic brothers and sisters, that she's been charting a path for undocumented immigrants? Can we talk about it? Can we talk about the healthcare reform that she's also pushed? Like, if we're going to call the roll on like what her record has been,
That's
call
right.
the whole roll, call the whole record. And I believe that we'll land in a place, the same place where we landed when she was running for president, that she was more qualified than the person that is running as a Democratic nominee right now. But there we go. I digress.
I would like to say that she is also Jamaican. So that is a deal, not just for Black American women, but our Caribbean brothers and sisters as well, which is a conversation that needs to happen at some point about the diaspora and how we view the world. But how I look at it is I look from a place of context, right? Like we can talk about, and I echo everything that you both are saying. And what I want to add is to the context. She is working in a system that was not and still does not function on our side. So she was making the best of what she had and what she could do. And I think also understanding Grace, we don't know what was going through her mind for certain things. We also do not know everything that she had to contend with in her tenure. Like we don't know how she made decisions. We don't know how she got to those decisions. We don't know why she made those decisions, because in that moment, with everything that she had with her, she made the decision that was the best for her and whomever was in the situation as a whole, especially when you're working in a system that views you as, you know, last and the bottom of the totem pole, especially as a Black woman. A Black woman who comes from an immigrant migrant family, right? And so we also have to take context. Context is important. Just like we talk about our Bible and the history of things, context is also important. So it requires grace, right? Like I you know, and none of us are perfect. And, you know, I had to think from the seat of like, yo, there are some things when I was teaching that people might pull up and be like, I don't know if that was the best decision that Miss Brooks made. But in that situation, in that scenario, in the education system, in low income communities and neighborhoods, the amount of things that I had to stack up to when my leadership team was predominantly white and the people on the board were predominantly white, I had some tough decisions to make. But that's not the total sum of all of my parts, right? Because I got students who are in college, I got students who graduated high school, I got students who know that they can be whomever they want to be. So I think it's the same, I know it's the same concept with our sister. Context and grace. Context and grace.
My God.
That's good.
That was so good.
That's good.
This is what I want to do real quick while everybody's watching. I want you to go and just make a mindset to go to thefreedomsummer.org. We want to get your information because we're doing events like this leading all the way up to the election in November. And so I want you to go to thefreedomsummer.org and register so we can keep your information. But awesome point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out something else there that is, I think, along the same lines in a different industry that has been a major talk over the last few days. And I want to quote one of my dear sisters, Minister Amanda Danielle Harper, who wrote a response to some of the social media outrage about Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion's latest song. And she wrote in the close of her essay, and I paraphrase, she says, and sister, if you're not following Amanda Harper on social media, you're missing out. She's one of the most brilliant scholars, preachers, thinkers in our generation. I'm grateful to know her, have her as a sister. She says that it's strange for preachers who quote Biggie and Tupac every Sunday to have a critique of Black women expressing their own sexuality. Let's talk about that. That preachers that utilize misogynistic trending rappers as sermon illustrations, then turning around and using a hermeneutic of respectability when it comes to Black women doing the same thing. Let's talk about that. What do you think?
That itself is like,
shout out to Amanda Harper. I just want to call her name again. Shout out to Amanda Harper.
It's 50 million patterns, right? Like it's 50 million ways we could go. It's 50 million ways we could go with that one, because you scratch one layer and then there's another layer, because the reality is some of those same pastors were the same ones that were watching the music video over, and over and over again. Some of them were wishing their wives and their girlfriends were saying and doing the same things for them. So
Oh, I know he's all right.
what angle are we coming from? Because the tea is piping, the tea is hot. Okay, how would you know? My first question is like, how would you know so much about the lyrics and the music video, Pastor, if you didn't watch it?
Hmm.
And why did you watch it so many times if you were so perturbed? What part of it made you uncomfortable, or are you really uncomfortable and you putting on a front for everybody else?
Come on, y'all talk. Come on, please. Let's have this conversation.
Like, why say something now? We've had history, centuries. What now? What, like, why now? Like, is this a sexual theological conversation that needs to happen? Like,
Ouch.
Reverend Atkins, what you got to say?
If you can't say amen, say ouch.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to I think it's easier to say, oh, that was for research purposes. It was helping me to be relevant. It was creating a backdrop without owning your place in it. Your place and your taste. Let me say that, your place and your taste. And so maybe it's considered discretionary. I'm trying to be discreet about it, but I'm blatant about it, and I want to make sure I'm capturing all generations. I don't want to leave any members out, and I want to make sure I can meet people where they are without us oftentimes realizing sometimes too much transparency is too much transparency. And it creates a barrier between respectability and popularity, you know.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a dicey one to say the least. I would just I don't have much to add there that hasn't already been said. I would just say, Reverend Atkins, you hit on this whole thing about popularity, and Reverend Brooks, you hit on this whole thing about contextualizing. And I think the fact of the matter is we didn't need a song to be talking about the context of what and the very the subject matter that we're having right here has always been popular to demean women from the pulpit. When we talk about misogyny, we're talking about what's the word I'm looking for? It's always been popular to sexually objectify women, and regardless of whether you're saying it from the pulpit or whether you're doing it in the practice of your ministry. And so the conversation today is not new, even though we're talking about it in the context of a song. But what I will say about that is, what I hope it promotes an opportunity for women to be unashamed and be unapologetic. And Reverend T.D. Jakes said this, Bishop T.D. Jakes said this in another context. And he talked about how, when you're in ministry, that one of the barriers to being in ministry is the person who is unwilling to get naked in front of the congregation. And so I thought that was a powerful statement, because what he was talking about was not clearly a physical nakedness, but he was talking about vulnerability. And so I think that speaks to kind of to some of the same things that Reverend Brooks and Reverend Atkins was talking about. Let's just be real about it. And if we're going to have the conversation, don't have it from a standpoint of demeaning women, but have it from an open, honest, perspective, and talk about where you show up, and, in the midst of all that. So I co-sign.
Okay, no, you had something else to say, Reverend Tiff?
No, I was giggling. Leslie's co-sign.
So let's talk about that. Let's start at a base level. what does misogynoir, and just for those who are watching, misogynoir is different than misogyny to an extent. Misogyny is the hatred and violation and violence towards women. And oftentimes those conversations dwell around white persons who identify as women. And it often excludes the intricate natures in which Black women experience that same violence and even greater levels of violence. And so for this conversation, we're not sincerely just talking about misogyny. We're talking about the violence towards Black persons who identify as women. And that is the reality. And so what does misogynoir look like in the Black church, in the Black pulpit, in the Black narthex, in the Black fellowship hall? What does it look like in the Black church parking lot? Let's talk about that. And you can go as blatant as you want to go, or you can go as microaggressive as you want to go. But what does this look like? Because here's the thing, we have a lot of men that are watching. Hopefully we got a lot of men that watch. There needs to be a lot of men watching this so that we can learn how to be allies and not tell women how to get over misogynoir. So what do we show us and tell us as much as you can? What does that look like for you on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a yearly basis?
Well, first I want to say shout out to Dr. Moya Bailey for coining the term from Northwestern University, misogynoir. Yes. Look her up. I think so. I'm gonna speak macro or micro. I think okay, so I'll say macro. Misogynoir looks like Black women who are complicit in the patriarchy. We have so many women in church that say that they're for women and be the same ones.
My.
When we wanna fight for something and all of a sudden they get silenced. They get silenced because they feel like they have fought so hard to get to where they wanted to be and want to hold position that when it comes down to like really doing the work, all of a sudden they go ghosts. And these are women who are like leaders of the women ministry. Like these are women who are over the lay organizations, right? Like these are the women in sororities, right? These are the women organizations that do the communal work and all of those things. But when it comes down to it, if they're not the only, if they are not the only woman, then it's just like, oh well, all of a sudden my tune changes, you know. Misogynoir in the Black church looks like the purity movement that wants to vilify young Black, and you know, we can't talk about misogynoir without talking about how it affects young women first. Right. Like you don't automatically are birthed and we are adults. We have to talk about how it starts at girlhood and talking about what we should wear and how our hair should be and what we should have on our face, what we should do, what we can't do, and not holding our brothers accountable to anything. And then being shocked years later when all types of stuff is happening. Like, oh my God, where did it start? Well, let's start by the fact that, you know, you have tried to villainize and criminalize young Black women. And haven't said anything to our brothers. Just let us go off. Misogynoir in the Black church looks like nepotism. Some pastors got boys that will do one thing for their boys and will have their daughter doing something else.
Wow. Say that again, please. Say that again.
Got it. The replay. Misogynoir in the Black church looks like nepotism. Some pastors that have, you know, boys and girls as children, they will basically, you know, prep their sons to be, you know, these huge major things, and they will tell their daughters, you know what, why don't you just go lead the choir? And nothing is wrong with being the choir lead, but if you're automatically putting your children in categories for where you think they should go, right, that is highly problematic. Why can't your daughter, why can't she be prepped to be pastor?
That I just real quick.
Why can't she be on the same?
No, I was just gonna say this just because today is the last episode of Greenleaf. I just think it's important to point out how much they pushed Jacob out there for all those years and told Charity that she could not preach.
Right.
Told her, I just want that. I just want to, if people need to see an example of it, tune in about 90 minutes. You're going to see it. But go ahead. Let's continue this conversation. What does misogynoir in the Black church look like?
She hit it. She hit it. You made several points. It is nepotism. It is raising my daughter and loving my son. It is praising my son and reprimanding my daughter. Outside of that, it's leaving us to suffer because of the structural injustices and all the systemic things that are happening, while telling him it's not fair the way they treat you, but expecting us to take it and continue to serve. It's saying to him, you don't need a tie, but saying to us, you always need a dress. You know,
wow.
Me being fit for the task is not enough. Me being qualified is not enough. Me having 1 degree is not enough, and him having no degree is sufficient. You know, it's okay for you to do the work and then show up, but he was here all along. So I think it's that, you know, at our detriment, you know, we become so emotional and so concerned about the spiritual needs of the church that we oftentimes carry those injustices and that patriarchy on our shoulders, and we don't move, we don't leave, we don't abort, because we're concerned about the social and emotional needs of the church and the community. And so we stick and stay, battered, bruised, tattered, torn. We stick and stay. And it's so unfortunate that all he has to do is pout and fold his arms. But how dare you rise up? You've been aggressive. You're assertive. You've said too much. You're emotional. But yeah, it's like that violence is like a stripping. It's like a stripping. It's almost like stand-up rape. I didn't have to fall on my back, but I stood up. And because I stood up and took it, you think that I can take it. And so you continuously inflict upon me that same stripping. And we stand on the shoulders of those ancestors whose names we called, and we keep standing. And we only have 2 cheeks to turn, but we still keep standing. We still keep standing.
Yeah. So I am a little, I have a response to that, an uncomfortable one, because I think that when you begin to stop talking about it in terms of philosophizing it, and you talk about it through a lens of lived experience, it's a little traumatic. It's a little traumatic. And in this space, you know, there are consequences for having this conversation. And so, but it is what it is. So it looks like, I think we've all heard the term, you have your hand up my skirt and your foot on my neck. That I think that's what that looks like for a lot of Black women. I think that if we talk about it for what it is, can we talk about the hostility that Black women face? I think Reverend Atkins talked about it before, but I can tell you, and this is not my past. I'm grateful that this is not my past. But I have had experiences where I've been across the table and I've had men yelling at me, and I've had men raising their fist at me. And it's not okay, but we're going to talk about it from the lens of live. I want to talk about it from a standpoint of everybody who's a preacher, who's called to preach, knows the humbling experience that it is to mount a pulpit. We know how scary that is. But can you imagine having mounted a pulpit and people yelling out sexual things to you in the middle of a full congregation as if it was okay? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that when you're standing in the back of a church and you're doing your duty to, you know, greet the people and shake their hands? Can you imagine what it feels like when somebody tells you that, you know, they were trying to concentrate on your sermon, but all they could imagine was having sexual intercourse with you?
What?
That's what it looks like. So I know that it's vulgar and it's causing like a reaction, but I think that in the spirit of trying to call a spade and talking about what's real, let's really talk about what's real. Because see, what's happening now is that we've gotten so comfortable having these conversations that we've had over and over and over again, that people have gotten comfortable telling our stories for us when they've never walked a mile in our shoes. And so, you know, that's a part of this whole issue where you begin to put a male lens on an issue and on a perspective, and you really have no idea what it's like day in and day out. Can we talk about how, you know, you're supposed to show up in spaces, that you're supposed to show up in worship services, ready to worship, ready to serve, how you're supposed to show up in business meetings, ready to serve, and somebody's sliding in your text messages and somebody's sliding your DM and they're talking about how beautiful you are. And so, you know, I bring that up to say that, you know, it becomes an issue because in those same spaces, I'm not deemed qualified and I'm not deemed worthy for consideration of equal opportunities to serve with my male counterparts.
Wow.
So if we want to know what it really looks like day in and day out, like, these are the experiences that Black women experience day in and day out. And there is not a safe space to be able to talk about these things. We're happy philosophizing about it. If that's the word, I made it up, maybe not. But we're happy couching it in these concepts, but we're never really able to talk about it in the construct of everyday lived experiences. And so if you want to know what it looks like, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like.
Let's just take a moment to let that sit in the space. It's continuously convicting for me as a male, and for those who are watching, we just need to let that sit, because that was real, it was felt, and it should not just be passed over. And we want to just let it be known. So, how do the so-called good guys that same lived experiences, the ones who portray themselves to be quote unquote allies and may not know exactly what it means to be an ally, men that are not correctable, that just believe that because they're nice, or because they don't quote unquote rape, or because they don't you know, they invite a woman to preach, that means that they don't have to wrestle with misogynoir and their own. So how do the so-called good guys, even, you know, as somebody myself who strives to be a better male ally to my sisters, how do we, I'll say we, I'm not talking about, I'll say we, how do we play into the harm that the Black church causes you?
So I would just say that, you know, the creation of spaces. Part of me wants to say the creation of safe spaces, right? And so until now, I've never really publicly shared those experiences. These are been experiences that have been couched between me and my, not just my sisters, but my sisters, my inner circle sisters. And so there is no space, because in a system that is oppressive, where do you go to have that conversation to say, hey, this happened to me? Who's the accountability structure when it's the highest of heights in the system that brings an unwillingness to change the system? So I think that there has to be a creation of safe spaces where women are unafraid and unafraid to share what that day in and day out experience looks like. But I think for men, it has to be an intentional effort to look around the room, and when there is no other counterpart in the room with you, to change that dynamic and to change that situation. I think that it has to be some intentionality around what it is that we celebrate. Because part of the challenge right now is that we celebrate tokenism. So when we call out a disparity and when we call out an inequity, you go, but what about this person? But what about that person? And that's the only person that you can call out, because there's a serious inequity. And so there has to be some intentionality around bringing strategy and thought partners to the table to really identify the barriers and being able to create solutions that kind of well, just being able to create solutions that propel women forward. We know, for example, that access is an issue. That we know that. We know that. So how can we come to the table collectively? How can we bring women to the table? How can we bring, the emerging, licentiates to the table? How can we bring our male counterparts that are influential? Because we know that there's hierarchy even in the male spaces, right? How can we bring all those folks to the table to begin to strategize around breaking down barriers and creating opportunities for women to thrive and succeed in ministry. And I think that when we talk about, this allyship that you're talking about amongst men, is being an advocate. It's being an advocate. It's not telling my story for me. It's not assuming that you know my story, but it's making sure that you make room for us in that space so that we can be equal partners in driving solutions and driving change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's a great point that you made, Reverend Leslie, about being an advocate and as a coordinator for WIM and Women in Ministry. I think it is important to bring the men to the table, because there are some good brothers who want to support us. I don't think it has to be deep. I'm all for the signs you see at the airport. You see something, say something. It don't have to be deep. You see something, say something. And what we have allowed to happen for so long is that advocacy is now a behind the scenes thing. And that's not what advocacy is. Advocacy means you're getting out front. And so I don't need you to call, text, or tweet that you have my back. I need you to stand up in the meeting. I need you to step up at the table. I need you to assert yourself into the conversation and then create space for me to say my own story, and not tap me when the meeting is over and say, you should have said this, or you should have said, no, where were you when I needed that foot in the door to get me in the room? Our illustrious connectional president, Dr. Erica Crawford, always says, it's not just enough to say that you support us. It's not just enough to rally around us, but give us a seat at the table where the decisions are being made, not inviting us to be a part of the forum that's taking place and we're sitting on the other side. We need to be at the table where those decisions are being made. We need to be delegates so that we're able to affect change from the places of position. We need to be represented where there's hierarchy. And what happened to deferring to us every now and then? I mean, I know how it is to want to rise in that hierarchy, but what about deferring to us every now and then? Sisters defer to sisters and brothers defer to brothers, but defer your position and say, do we have enough women at the table? Or, I'll step back, I'll fall back so that they can be represented. Look at our bench. It's going to be thin. Thank God for COVID. That it gave us another year go round, but our bench is going to be thin. Look at the number of districts we have. Keep us balanced in our branch of Zion. But, advocacy has to be about being out front and not texting me saying, I got your back. No, show me that you have my back. Don't be afraid to be seen with me in those meetings. Don't be afraid to walk into the meeting with me. And when we get inside the room, don't you go to the left while I go to the right. Sit beside me. And so that's really what allyship is about, being present and being accountable to me.
I agree with what both of you said. So I'll just add this too. Hype us like you hype your boys. Simple. Like just the way you shout out your homies every time they doing something, and just how you hype them up every time they accomplish something. Do the same thing for your sisters. It's not a lot. It could literally be a Facebook post. Shout out to my sis, whomever, for doing X, Y, and Z. Look at such and such go. Like, you know, like it's actually showing our accomplishments as well. Speaking of our accomplishments as well, and not waiting until we get to a position of power to do it.
Wow.
Not waiting until everybody knows our name to do it. Not waiting till all of a sudden we become popular or whatever the case may be. But starting from, you know, that's my homegirl. I know she's super smart. She's starting a business. Let's hype her up. Like the way that y'all hype each other up, I'm always just like, wow, like y'all are really like rooting for your homie. Now do that for us.
Well, can I just yeah, I would just add to that you know that's a positive spin on it, but understand that as women begin to move this thing forward, that they are going to be villainized. We are going to be villainized, that we are going to be ostracized, and so not being quick to stand with us, being quick to cover us in those spaces as we go, because the fact of the matter is, I was thinking about this today, that you know there's no such thing in our history as power ever being given over willingly. And so what at some point is going to happen is there's going to be an uprising. At some point there's going to be a challenging and the dismantling of systems. Let's just call it for what it is. Like history has taught us that there's really no such thing as us coming in and making a kind demand and it just being given over willingly. But if we understand that, then we understand that comes at a cost. And so when you talk about allyship, are you willing to pay that cost? That's where rubber meets the road. Are you willing to sacrifice the relationship that you have with folks in power? Are you willing to leverage the relationships that you have with folks in power? If you really want to talk about standing by our side, like it's going to cost you something. And so understand that when you want to be a partner, like Tiffany said, get out my DM and stand with me publicly on these things that we're trying to push forward to propel and advance women in ministry and in the Black church.
Wow.
Agreed.
This is major. And I hope that every brother that's listening, and it's not the center men, like this isn't about us, but just for every brother, all of us, myself included, have either complicitly or explicitly been participating in the harm and the violence that these sisters are talking about. And one thing that I had to deal with my therapist, and I really believe that a lot of this might start when men get therapy, because we enact a lot of harm, and we think that just because we feel guilty about it, that makes us good. But the real change, as you all said, is not, and I believe Sister Wasaba City Bay, and if I'm saying it right, if I'm saying it wrong, correct me. She makes this statement, which is very important. I'm so over performative allyship that it's not just about feeling sorry for sisters who deal with it, but it's about how do I participate in harm reduction. And that's something that I continue to wrestle with, and I try to find ways as a brother to not harm both implicitly or explicitly my sisters. And I'm growing, I'm getting there. And just like Jocelyn said, I don't need a pat on the back for it, but I just want brothers, for us to know we need to heal, because if we don't heal, we're going to continue to hurt our sisters.
And we appreciate that from you. We do. We appreciate that. And I'm sure those of us who are here on this panel this evening do appreciate you taking a risk to support us.
And I want to be clear, and I thank you for that, big sis. That I didn't share what I shared because I wanted that. because I just wanted to be clear. The reason why I share it is because people like me, they think, and we're conditioned to think that because we don't fit a certain picture of what a violator of women look like, that we are not capable of perpetuating that harm until there is deep examination of the ways that misogyny, and patriarchy affect Black men. We will continue to perpetuate that harm, and that's why you know I'm always just trying to not just check in with myself and with my therapist, but I'm checking in with my sisters, brothers, and this is so important. And I promise I'm gonna shut up after this, and we're gonna open it up for more conversation. brothers, and I'm so glad. I thank God for my therapist. I promise I thank God for my therapist. We've got to learn how to have friends that identify as women that we are not actively trying to sleep with.
Amen.
Hello.
That's just very important.
Amen.
And even if that's not your intention, we have to be. And I'm saying this as somebody who has been on the wrong side of both. We have to be intentional about creating that boundary. Let me just say this. Not every cute sister that you know in ministry is your wife.
Hello.
Sometimes she's going to be your pastor. I just want to say that.
Sometimes she's going to be your sister.
Right.
Or your sister.
Yeah.
But I want to specifically to say pastor because we need to learn to submit to a sister that's not going to be our co-pastor, and we be the senior pastor. You know what I'm saying? I each of the sisters on this call, in some way, y'all pastor me. There are other sisters whose names I could call who are watching. They pastor me, and it's probably because my mom helped me with it, but it is taken, and it's still going to continue to take for me to the end of my days for me to really work on it, because as a man, I'm brought into a world that privileges me. And just like white people don't see what white privilege is until it's in their face. And because they're born into a universe that supports everything that they do, even as a Black man. I remember there was an article that said that Black men are the white people of Black people, by very smart brothers. And it really convicted me. And this conversation continues to convict me. It continues to hold me accountable. And brothers, you need sisters in your life that are going to hold you accountable. I'm grateful for the sisters that I confide in that say, Melik, sit your behind down, get your life together, get in therapy, because we're gonna heal. We're gonna heal, and the more we heal, and the more we're held accountable. Not all accountability ain't gonna embarrass you. It's just gonna call you to change. But if the accountability and the harm that we are causing as men is perpetuated without any, not even just regret, or any desire to change or any effort to change, then that must be called out. And so that's why, honestly, and I'm gonna say this is why I'm glad that the sisters who I have on the call today are on this call, because they have been open about holding systems and people accountable for our participation. And I want to say that again, our participation, my participation in misogyny. So real quick, I want us to, since this is 7:54, I want us to spend at least next few minutes. We're going to try to get out of here by 8:05. By 8:05, let's start a hard stop at 8:05, because I know y'all got stuff to do. Are there any questions? Any questions from the chat? Any questions from Facebook? First of all, let's give our sisters a tremendous round of applause. Just y'all have done an excellent job. I want you to know that I appreciate you and I celebrate you, and I know that our church is better and will be better and is going to be better and it must be better because sisters like you are here.
Can I add something to what you said?
Sure.
And this is just really, it's small, but it's not insignificant. For in as much as, and I'm not trying to placate, but I do think that it's important to say this, that in as much as there have been violators on my journey, there have been stand-up models of people that you were talking about on my journey. And I can call the role for them. They've been my fathers and my uncles and my big brothers in ministry. And so this is not about, I just want to be clear and just go on record and say that this is not about bashing men in ministry. This is not about bashing men in leadership. What this is a call to rise up for those who have been complacent, for those who have been perpetrators, for those who have been violators. This is a call to action for those who have been asleep at the wheel, for those who have been comfortable and have benefited from the system. To stand up with those who have been by our side all along, because it's going to take a force. We're not just moving a gender; we're moving a whole community together.
Right.
And so this, and so I just want to be clear in this space, just in case there was any question about like who and what we were talking about. This is not a failure to acknowledge that there have been stand-up men that have been by our side and that have had our back in this journey. This is the call to those who have not been stood up in these spaces.
Right.
Yeah. And it's about holding each other accountable too. Because sometimes we are the very people that fall into the trap, because unfortunately it's so ingrained in every part of our culture that, you know, there are moments that even we need to be called out about it. There are moments where we need to be held accountable. But something I want to point to that you said, Melik, was that, you know, you're thankful for people that hold you accountable. And the reason why that is a equal exchange and it's reciprocated is because we are open to it. Right. We can't think we're above, or we can't operate out of a place of conceitedness where we don't believe that we are above, where we believe that we are above reproach. We have to operate in humility, and we have to extend grace to one another to say, hey, I think Tana mentioned it earlier, you know, people evolve, people grow, and how people were 5 years ago was not the same way that they might be. People change in a day. Okay. And so extending that too, but it's about being open, you know, being open to be corrected, being open to be held accountable, but also to have that equal exchange while also affirming one another as well, right? Like, okay, you said this was a little off. So let's talk about it. But I do honor you. I honor your personhood. I honor your humanness. I honor every part of you that makes you God's creation, because you are God's creation. But, you know, there are some things that we need to course correct to make sure that we have a healthy community amongst all of us. And, you know, I think about the New Testament church and think about Corinthians, right? And building that community, like, okay, we got to hold each other accountable. But at the end of the day, it's not about us as individuals. It's how we are functioning as a body, as one. And, you know, if you cut the head off, what happens? If you take the heart out, what happens? If you cut the feet off, what happens, right? And so no person is insignificant in this, and everyone has a role to play. And I think that, I know, once we get to a place where we can all come to the table and really dig into these things and work to change and shift them, that will be, you know, healthier than we've ever seen before.
So real quick, there's a couple questions, and I think we're talking about it. Reverend Tashara Void, I found out and I learned her nickname Mona. I learned her nickname Mona. So Reverend Tashara Void shared this, and I think it's a very important. When or how do we bring misogynistic women and men to the table? And I add on, do they belong at the table, or do we give them a talk before we get them to the table? Well, how does that work? Let's talk about it.
So I would say they're already at the table.
Wow.
I mean, like, so I need more Reverend Void on what you mean by that, because I think that that's part of the challenge, is that they're already holding spaces in some of these tables. And so the question for me is not how do you get them to the table, it's how do you get them out from the table.
Wow.
and how do you evolve? And how do you get those who are, about, building a kingdom that is reflective of what God intended to the table? That's what I'd add there.
And that's good. Let's go to because we only got about 5 more minutes. So let's try to get through these questions. Jordan Deloach, who is a member at Bethel AME Church in Selma, North Carolina, a fresh graduate of high school, headed to Wake Tech in the fall. We celebrate this sister. 18-year-old brilliant. She started I think it's called an equity club at her school in Johnston County, North Carolina. Doing the doggone work. Proud of her.
Congratulations, Jordan Deloach.
Yeah. So she asked this question, and you all talked about it, but I want you to kind of touch on a little bit more. She asked, how do we approach older women in the church about their harmful dialogue that is majorly impacted by misogyny?
Being okay, let me tell you something. This is because y'all know what I go through, okay? as a millennial, okay? Being okay with correcting people when they're wrong. And one thing I've learned from my grandmother is that sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? Because, not everybody's going to be open to it. But one thing I'm a big supporter of is self-advocacy. And I used to teach my teenage high schoolers this too. Always be an advocate for yourself. So if someone says something to you, an older woman that's offensive, in that moment, that's when you need to correct her and say, hey, I know that you might be coming from whatever place you're coming from. However, what you said was offensive to me, and please do not do that again. That's how I've been able to navigate spaces, but I've also leveraged my allies too when I felt like it was something that I couldn't really handle. So who are my allies saying, hey, this is what happened and I was uncomfortable with it, but you're closer to her than I am. Can you do X, Y, and Z? And then I've had some older women go to bat for me before I even had to say anything. So that's called relationship building too, right? Like I've had some people be like, you're not going to talk to her that way. But there have been moments where I've had to say, thank you, sister so-and-so, for your opinion. However.
Yeah. Can I just add like 2 seconds to that? And I would just say everything that Tiffany said, I would just add the encouragement piece that just because you advocate for yourself does not mean that you're going to change somebody's mind.
Right.
And so just know that sometimes that what you, just like a preacher, we can say things sometimes, and you how preachers say, oh, you'll get that later, you'll get that when you come home. Like they understand that you advocating for yourself, and sometimes planting a seed for somebody to shoot on later, and it may not happen in your time and your space, but they may be mindful the next round. So I just wanted to offer that, to not be discouraged if you don't see immediate change or even get agreement in advocating for yourself.
And for some people, they just need to know not to try you. Sometimes that's what it is.
In the words of the great artist, try Jesus.
Try me. Some people just need to know not to try it again. But like I said, and this is what I meant to add too. Some people are coming from a place of ignorance. And sometimes it's also understanding like, hey, you are speaking from a different time, a different context, and how do we work together to get on the same page too? Not saying that'll be for everyone, but I know Reverend Dillard said, pray first, approach your humility and an open mind. So that goes for both parties as well. But sometimes, again, some people need to know just not to try you, to mind their business and go do what they got to do.
All right, so
and she may not be in that place. She may not be in that place yet. At 18, we do want to empower, but maybe there is a opportunity for her to bridge that gap. I believe that there is something that she can glean, and I'm a little bit older, that she can glean from that elder in the church, while at the same time there may be something in that woman's past that they're having a hard time bridging that divide. And so maybe the young person needs to take that opportunity to get her to understand. I know you have a story that you want to tell. Let me see if I can tell my story, and together we can create rich legacy with being respectful. So yeah.
All right, real quick. I know it's 8:05. Oh, but this conversation gets so good. I got one last question. Oh, I promise it's the last thing. We're gonna get up out of here. Um, Somebody, I forgot because it scrolled down. I'm watching the chat and it scrolled past it. But when we were talking about what misogynoir looks like, they brought up how women who have been harmed by the church, when they get into positions of leadership, perpetuate that harm on the women, almost as if on one side they are trying to prepare them for what they'll face, but then on the other side there is projection of their own pain and so Reverend Stephanie Atkins, as I want you to kind of get at this because you've been an instructor in the Board of Examiners. And you've been through the Board of Examiners. How have you navigated that space? How have you seen that dynamic? And what can you and these other sisters and the ones who are watching, who one day will be our chair and our deans of our Board of Examiners, and will be running districts as bishops and
They
as presiding
absolutely
elders
will.
and as
They
leading
absolutely
pastors,
will.
we decree and declare.
I see it. I see it already.
How do we touch that?
Yes, that is, it can become projection. It has become projection. I started the Board of Examiners in 2003. And my dean and chair at that time, one was a woman, one was a man. And I think that what is important for us to understand, and having been in ministry now 17 going on 18 years in November, I don't want you to be prepared for what you're going to experience. This is just me talking. I want you to see my scars, and I want to prevent you from experiencing what I had to experience.
My God.
There's absolutely no reason you need to go through what I went through. I want the way to be better. I want to really be the one who lays down and lets Leslie and Tiffany walk across on my back, because there is no reason for me to rise. I never knew that one day I would be teaching in the Board of Examiners. It just didn't cross my mind. But I don't want that bitterness that they felt that I was subjected to come across as bitterness. I want it to be betterness. Because what you're speaking, Malik, I see. I didn't know you two, but I knew you two. I did not know you two, but I knew you two. So the way has to be paved, and that's a part of what being the coordinator for women in ministry is about. It's about empowering my sisters to not have to have their knees scraped the way I had my knees scraped. I don't want you to cry the tears that I've shed. I don't want you to feel the pain that I felt. I don't even want you to go through what I've gone through, not at the hands of just brothers, but at the hands of women who are now at the top of the game and not reaching down. I can proudly say that I'm in African Methodism because of the Right Reverend Vashti Murphy McKenzie. I was fine where I was, but I can stand proud today and say there's not a day that goes by that we don't connect, that she's not still speaking life into me. Breaking the stained glass windows wasn't just for her. I can say it because I know it. Not I think it, not I feel it. I know it. I know that when she was doing what she did, as she does it, she has me on her mind. And wherever I find myself tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that, it's so that the way is better for Leslie. The way is better for Tiffany. I'll smack a man if I hear him say something about not listening to what's coming out of your mouth and concerned about the sway in your hip. I would. And so it does not have to be projection, but I can honestly stand there and say it has. We don't have to haze. This is not a pledge. This is not a pledge. My story is how I got over, not now how you got to get over too. Nah.
Can I just add to that? I know we're short on time, but I will say this. I will say, you just brought up a very interesting point, something that we joke about, but something that is so real. You said, this is not, we're not hazing. This is not a pledge process, and yet it is. Like, if we're just gonna be honest, it is. And so I find myself in an uncomfortable situation because while I appreciate your sentiment, I have to be honest that in my board of examiners classes, that over the years there were women who would tell their stories, and there would be women who would share their experiences. And it's an interesting thing that, like, when I was hearing their stories, I was looking at them and going, nah, no, that didn't happen to you. That didn't go down like that.
Right.
And it wasn't until you have your own experiences that you're like, oh, this is what they were talking about. Like, well, and in a weird, twisted kind of way, it was hearing those experiences that let you know that you weren't crazy. That before you were able to talk to anybody else about them, that this was a culture and that you were now victim to the culture. And so I appreciated the informal ways in which the women who were in our board of examiners classes were open enough and vulnerable enough to talk about the situations. And it's a weird thing because the classes in which they shared those things, that's not what those classes were about. They weren't. But in some sort of way, they were able to drop those nuggets. And so the question really was about, people inflicting trauma. And so and so I would just say, it's not a good thing that, that historically there's this culture, and I guess it depends on the conference that you're in, that, you are a slave to the denomination. See, she laughing because it's true. But that narrative has come out, and know that is not true. I would say see past the offense to see the trauma.
Right.
That's really what that's the most plain way that I can put it. See past the offense. Because when you begin to understand somebody's story, then you can understand how they show up in a space. And it may not be intended for your harm, but maybe that there's something out of it that, that could be used for your. So, I'll leave it there.
Wow. See past the offense to see the
trauma.
To see the trauma.
Wow. That is major. I just want to thank you all so much for this conversation, for your transparency, for your honesty, for your authority on this topic. And I pray God's blessings and prosperity on you. God's not just strength, because you're not a mule for suffering, but I pray God's prosperity on you, that God will make the way easier, and that God will fight for you and raise up people to fight alongside of you, so you don't have to fight too many battles. I pray that. And so I want us to, in this space, in this moment, in a similar vein to how we started by naming those whose shoulders we stand upon. I want us to end this space by naming those in our lives or around our lives who will one day stand on our shoulders. Those young sisters. You don't have to say their whole name because we don't know if any creeps are watching. But but just you could just call their first name, and those who will stand on your shoulders and our shoulders one day. I'll start. Ayana, Anaya, Jordan, Morgan. I call the name of Soph. I call the name of Mackenzie. I call the name of Ashley. I call the name of Micah. I share those sisters and those other nameless sisters, babies, girls whose innocence and whose opportunity at just a fair life is stripped from them just because they were born Black and identify as a girl. I call their name.
I'll go. I'll call the names of Kalaya, of Mir, of Jordan, of Destiny, of Zion, of Johanna, and all the young women and young girls that I've had the privilege and the opportunity to serve as their teacher. Um, and I'm not talking about in church spaces, I'm talking about in the public education space, and all the other young women and girls that I have been able to impress upon in the classroom, and to be able to see them flourishing in the way that they are flourishing is amazing to me. But I call their names as well.
I'll call the name of an Abby and an Anaya, a Jada and a Jasmine. I call the name of Jadelyn, and Hannah and Sydney and so many others. Tamika, collectively known as all my children, people that I've had. These are daughters that I've had the privilege of ministering to and watching in youth ministry, and being able to be the dynamic force that they're being called in to in this season. So,
And I call the names of my daughters, Sequoia and Aronica. I call the name of my granddaughter, Mink. I call the names of those I've mentored who are in ministry now. And I call the name of Jasmine and Kirsten. I call the names of Kimla and Ryan and of Ariana. I call the names of those young women who have served under me in YPD. I call the names of Miranda. I call the names of those who danced under me in dance ministry. I call the names of Shanice. I call the names of Shannon. I call the names of Lauren. I call the names of Montre. I call the names of those who have yet to answer their call because they are afraid of this very task that we're talking about. And I call the names of those who will put their hands to the plow, that God would give them strength, that they would receive tenacity and perseverance, to not look back and to not turn back.
We say Ashe.
Ashe.
We say Ashe.
Ashe.
Say Ashe. Oh.
Ashe.
God bless you all. Thank you so much for your time. We love you. And remember, it's not just about you feeling guilty for my brothers. It's not just about how guilty you feel. But what we must do from this moment forward is to find ways to stop causing harm. Love you. God bless. Good night.
Amen.
All right.